The Great Lakes, it affects so many people, over 30 million people, 8 states, and 2 provinces of Canada. And that's something very important to remember when we're talking about this, because it's not only the United States, it also involves our friends in Canada. And it's really a joint effort when it comes to regulation, cleaning up of pollution. It's a joint effort between the two countries. And joining me now is Paul Evans. He's the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Ontario Ministry of Environment. Paul, thanks so much for joining us here.
Thanks for inviting me, Christy.
So talk to me a little bit about what you're expecting out of Great Lakes Week and Canada's role and Ontario's role in talking about preservation of the lakes.
It's great being a participant, as you said, with the number of U.S. states and Canadian provinces around the lakes. We share a legacy with the Great Lakes. What's really important, I think, is that Canada and the U.S. have just renegotiated a Great Lakes water quality agreement, which will guide binational actions on the lake. And Ontario congratulates the federal governments for doing that. And really, we're now looking forward to negotiating an agreement with our federal government around how we can implement the commitments made in that Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement.
Let's go back to the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement and those negotiations. It takes a little bit to make sure that everyone's on the same page. What are some of the things inside of that have differed from years past?
It's an agreement between Canada and the U.S. So as a subnational, a provincial government, we were not directly involved in the negotiations, but our federal government did keep us informed. But certainly I think what's new in the new agreement that we're seeing is that it's starting to make some time-bounded commitments, for example, around looking at phosphorus loadings in Lake Erie, taking other actions to address some of the emerging threats in the Great Lakes. And so we're looking forward to our agreement with with Canada around how we can implement our own commitments, if you will, around the lake.
So talk to me about that and what is entailed in the agreement. And is it the Great Lakes Protection Act, or?
We have an agreement, the Canada-Ontario Agreement respecting the Great Lakes Basin ecosystem that's been in place since about 1971. The agreement's up for renewal, so we're in the process now of renegotiating that agreement. And it really guides provincial and federal actions around the lake. So around how we can deal with sediment cleanup, around how we can deal with restoring wetlands and shorelines, et cetera, around the lake. So it's very important in terms of anchoring the commitments from both levels of government over the life of the agreement. We've also, the Ontario government has just come out with a Great Lakes Protection Act, a proposed Great Lakes Protection Act, which combined with the Canada-Ontario Agreement on the Great Lakes, we feel will really enhance our actions to protect and clean up the Great Lakes.
How do conversations get started when you talk about negotiating these acts? And it would take, obviously a long time to be able to do that. But tell me a little bit about the process when you go to start getting involved in those conversations.
Well, one of the things is that you want to assess, I think, how effective the previous agreement was. So we certainly provided a lot of input to our federal government in terms of how the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, the existing one, was working from our perspective.
And how was it working from your perspective?
When you look at the record of cleanups on the areas of concern over the last number of years, the 40 years of binational effort to restore and clean up the Great Lakes, it's been doing pretty well, but more work needs to be done. And I think that's really what we're looking with respect to our new agreement with our federal government around our Canada-Ontario Agreement. Again, looking there around how we can deal with some of these new threats that the Great Lakes are looking at. So looking at issues around invasive species that you were talking to one of your previous guests about, looking at new contaminants, looking at the issues around nutrient loadings, which I think are causing a lot of the algal blooms that we're seeing in parts of Lake Erie and in southeast, at least on our side of the lakes, on southeast Lake Huron. Dealing with other things, new things like climate change, the effect of climate change in terms of lake levels, the impact on infrastructure and new extreme storm events, the warming of the lakes. So these are all things that we're really looking forward to dealing with in our new Canada-Ontario Agreement on the Great Lakes, and some of the things that we're also looking at in our Great Lakes Protection Act.
I think people are talking a lot about the lake levels that have been changing from year to year and going much lower. What kind of reaction are you getting from people in Ontario when they're just trying to enjoy their recreational time on the water?
I have a cottage just off of Georgian Bay, and on my way up this past week, I'm seeing a lot of signs on the side of the highway saying restore our lake level. So obviously there's a lot of concern by people in the Georgian Bay area with respect to lowering of water levels. That's something that we'll really be wanting our federal government to look to, because I think it's really a binational issue. But it also, I think, points to the issue around climate change and how we need to not just mitigate the effects of climate change, but adapt to it. So how do we adapt to new lake levels, et cetera?
You know, I was just going to say that it's about adaptation to it as well, because as we know, I mean, these are moving bodies of water, and things are not going to be a constant. I was speaking to a scientist who talked about, you know, each year we want to make sure that our dock is at the same place and our boat is in the same place, and that we can go out and we can enjoy everything the same way that it was year after year, and that our beach looks the same. But these are living bodies of water, and things are ever so often changing. Is it something that we need to be able to start to adjust to the fact that we can't make things the same every year, but adjust to what our surroundings are giving us?
I think that's what adaptation is about, is looking at what is the effect of climate change, for example, on the lakes, and then adapting to that. But we recognize that on both sides of the border, the lakes are an important source of tourism, revenues, commercial fisheries, et cetera, and of the great source of recreation, 100,000 cottages on the Ontario sides of the Great Lakes. So it's important that we maintain the legacy so that we have them for generations to come. But I think that we need to really be looking at actions now in terms of how we can adapt to some of these new things that are happening to the lake, like climate change.
I often find that people who are involved in Great Lakes issues have a passion about the water and can bring back some pretty specific memories about the first time that they've ever been involved with the Great Lakes. Anything you care to share about your time at the cottage, or when was the first moment that you knew that you wanted to get involved in Great Lakes issues?
I think two things. I live near the lake, so I use the waterfront trails near Toronto, so I'm actively connected to the lake, and my kids have been going to summer camps on Georgian Bay. So I think those are the two things that really make the lakes very special and personal to me.
And last question for you, Paul. Go ahead and tell us what you think you'd like to get out of this week. When you leave on Thursday, what do you hope to take away from this week?
I'm going to really enjoy, I think, hearing from the other U.S. states in terms of their experiences, some of the things that they're looking at in terms of policy issues, legislative or regulatory responses. We have a lot to learn from each other because we all share the same body of water. So I think just hearing about those experiences, I think I'll be looking forward to taking away with me.
Paul Evans, thanks so much for joining us here on Great Lakes Now. We appreciate it.
Great, thanks.
Enjoy Great Lakes Week.